Alright. Looks good to me. Hello. Sorry, this is my first time doing a live stream, which I think will now absolve me of any issues that arise since this is the first time. But either way, I'm excited to be here with you because this is the release day for my new book, The Daemon Machine, published by Federal Press. You're right there. And well, I'm here to talk to you about the book. I'm here to answer some questions that some people have sent in. And I'm also going to read the first 3 chapters for you live. So that should be good. You'll get a feel for the book, and then you can decide, well, I definitely want to read the rest of that story. But we'll get to that in a minute. First, I want to thank Federal Press and everyone who works at that publishing company who took a chance on this story and are releasing it to the world today. So thank you so much for taking on the Daemon Machine, and we hope for big things from this series. And I want to thank everyone who supported me to get this book where it is today, helped with some story ideas, helped with some editing along the way as well. So let's start with some questions before we get into the book itself. So first question that someone sent to me is, why do I write books in the first place? Well, when I was young, I think I was about early teens, I was reading a lot, as a lot of teens do. They're not always on their phones or playing computer games. A lot of them like to read too. And there's only really, I think when you start to pick up books or when you watch TV or play computer games, you sort of get a feel for a lot of writers who you think are your favorites. They write the way that you kind of understand and you enjoy and are entertained by, and you kind of get stuck on those writers. Sometimes it's very hard to try something new, and that's all right, but you have your favorites. And I had my favorites back in the day. I had my R.L. Stine books, the Goosebumps series. I had Anthony Horowitz, I had some Terry Pratchett's, Mallory Blackman, and even back in those days, because I am that old, some Harry Potter, and also one of my other favorites at the time, which escapes my mind now, right when I need it. I'll come back to it. Either way, lots of authors who I really enjoyed, and I sort of waited for the next book. But it takes quite a while to get a good book out there into the world. And it was during that time I thought, well, why don't I write what I like to read? And that was the birth of my writing career. Because in the months and sometimes years waiting for the next book in the series, I would just write my own stuff. I was introduced to a writer called Matthew Riley back in those days. An Australian writer, writes action, very, very intense action thrillers. And while waiting for his next book, that's what I started writing, my own action thriller. And then I just that just branched out into my other likes. So I really like sci-fi and fantasy. So I started writing my own stories. And then I got hooked on that very idea. And it wasn't just something to fill the time so that I could read my own stuff and or get my fix, my reading fix. I was starting, oh wow, this is so much fun. This pure creation that's going on when I write. So, and that was how it blossomed. And I finished my first book, which was called Return to Earth, probably around the age of 15 or 16. And that book remains my first literary love, because that was the first book I ever wrote. And one day I'll do more with it. But for the time being, I've obviously got to focus on the Daemon Machine and some other projects too. But that was the start of my writing career, and I've never looked back. It's so much fun to create, and I think that if you ever start writing, you should always write to enjoy your own stories first before you put it out there for anyone else. If you enjoy it, you're on your way. Okay, you're on your way to being a great author. If you can enjoy it, really, that's the first thing that should matter. And then put it out there for everyone else to read and enjoy as well. Oh, that's good. Whose books do you admire? Well, I've already name dropped some people there. I do have to point out Mallory Blackman. One of her books, called Hacker, was the first book I remember reading like all the way. Like I couldn't put it down. It's a very engrossing story, and it draws you in, and you can't get out. You have to keep going. There's so much mystery, and you can almost tell that at the very end there is this conclusion that you're waiting for, where everything gets resolved, and it's worth waiting for. So I really admire Hacker in particular, and other books by Mallory Blackman, like the Noughts and Crosses series, for example, or Picard, and that I think it's such a joy when you find a book and that you can't get out of. You can actually binge read. You can binge watch TV, but you can also binge read books, and that's the first book I really remember. And I think without that, I might not been such a voracious reader, and maybe therefore I wouldn't have been a writer. I loved the R.L. Stine Goosebumps series. They were exceptional because of they had this, unlike any other book at the time that I was reading, they had cliffhangers at the end of every chapter. So you can't get out of that book. I used to devour those things in like an hour or 2 hours. They were so good. Anthony Horowitz, Alex Rider series, Terry Pratchett's Discworld series is phenomenal. I would love to be able to write books like that one day. That's where I'm aiming, I feel. If I can get something like that out into the world, I'd be very happy. And of course, a lot of what I write is influenced by other fantasy and sci-fi that's out there in the world. Lord of the Rings, Warhammer 40k, and Warhammer itself. Those things sort of really sparked some interest, and yeah, there's a some. But Matthew Riley, I should have really mentioned it. Matthew Riley, Australian author. I think he more than anyone else kickstarted my actual love of actually being able to write, because his books were just so thrilling and unputdownable. I'll go with that. New word, if not, and just perfect for just. You can't put them down because the action is described so well. I think I wouldn't actually be a writer without reading his books, because he just introduced me to this idea that a book's action could be described so well that draws you in. Sometimes action written in books doesn't have an effect on me because we get spoiled by everything we see in films, and how can your imagination take what's on the page and get it in your head? But Matthew Riley's books did that quite strongly. C.S. Lewis books, Chronicles of Narnia, fantastic series, which sort of really motivates me, and my faith on how to weave like philosophical, theological things like that into your stories and ideas and themes. And C.S. Lewis's books, the Narnia series, were really good in helping me to understand how that's happened. And it's like the same with Terry Pratchett books, and it's the same for every book I read when I was young. And so they're my literary inspirations. Where did the idea for this book come from? So the Daemon Machine is it kind of has a morbid start to it. I think it's the best way to describe it. There's actually 2 reasons why I started to write this book. One, I won't tell you. That's very personal to me, and I'm going to keep that to myself. But let me explain how I came up with this idea. You see, when I was probably in my late teens when I came up with this idea, and I was sort of thinking to myself at the time, am I ever going to have an adventure like I read about in all the books I love? Is a Gandalf going to come to my door and whisk me away to go and fight a dragon? And you go, well, probably not. Am I going to fall into some sort of fantasy world because I went through a strange door that I found, I don't know, anywhere? I walk through the wrong door, I pass into an alternate dimension. And unfortunately, you kind of realize, it's not going to happen, is it? I'm not going to actually go into a new world. It's kind of sad. It made me feel very sad. But then this is where the morbid thought comes in. I just thought, well, I remembered a line from Peter Pan, which is, to die would be a great adventure. And that's what popped into my head around that time. And I thought, well, yeah, if you were, I'm sorry, it's so morbid, but I sort of thought, well, all humans, we die. And a lot of us think that's not the end. That's a good thing. I don't. Uh, I'm a Christian. I think there is something afterwards, and that's going to be a great adventure for me. But at that time, when I was having this idea, I thought, well, what if the next life was just a sort of next step, and then maybe the first of others, or maybe it is that there is like your soul has to live its life. That's what my thinking was, and I thought, well, that might be the only adventure I get to go on. You know, we live our lives here on Earth. We can have adventures here, um, but you know, it's a bit of a broken world, and we always start to think that if we were somewhere else, it would be a lot better. And I kind of thought that yeah, if I died, what comes next would be an adventure. You get to start again, you with all the knowledge you possess on this life, and you get to look at this brand new world, and off you go, and it's all new, and it's so fresh, and it could be anything. And from that thought was given birth to the Demon Machine. And I obviously wanted to restrain myself a little bit. I didn't want to step on the toes of people who have thoughts and feelings about the afterlife. In some ways, I wanted to combine kind of all the sort of ideas that are just out there in the world, and kind of tackle them, but really think about it as an adventure that you you never thought you'd get have. And it's also about your soul, that eternal part of yourself living on, and what it means to live on after the physical body dies. And that just accumulated, sorry, into this particular story, starring Grace, who falls into what's called the soul life here, where she has her adventures and where she has to deal with the demon machine that you will read about in there. And that's the genesis of this particular story. And it's an opportunity to explore some very interesting themes. That I would say that the central theme of this one is sacrifice, and what it means to make a sacrifice with your life. So, yeah, more from that when I read you some chapters later. What's the next question that we have? Oh, who is my favorite character in the Demon Machine? Well, obviously, I have a soft spot for Grace. She's the main character. She's the protagonist. We're going to see everything through her experiences. There's a little bit of me and her, like the way she reacts and thinks about it is my reactions, but also I've tried to make her own separate character that stands out. Um, there's obviously, you'll hear these names later. There's obviously Ugg, who is a gigantic caveman who speaks in a very posh British accent. Um, you'll have to find out why later on when you read. Um, he's he's a massive guy with super strength, and like that's who wouldn't want to be that, you know? And I thought that's quite quirky. But really, my favorite character in here is one of the bad guys, and his name is Legion, and he's a demon. Okay, and one of the reasons why he's my favorite is because if you ever write your own story one day, you'll be surprised at how they take on a life of their own. They really do. You'll be writing, and suddenly you'll realize I didn't really mean for that character to go off on that track. They actually sort of gain a sort of sentience as you write them. And Legion was one of those. He kind of went off on his own without me really realizing I was writing him this way. He became, well, actually, I should say it. It's not a him. It's an it. I apologize. It became something I almost lost control of. It's very strange to say that when I'm the one typing at the keyboard, but and I realized I wanted to keep him around for longer in the book, and the way he's starting to sort of see the world differently to how I envisioned him, because he's a bad guy, but he's got a different way of looking at the world. So Legion's my favorite character in the book. Well, in this book, he might end up being someone I don't like later on, and well, terrible consequences for him, I guess. Or maybe another character. Well, there's a lot of characters that I'm planning for book 2 that I absolutely love because they're based on some of my favorite historical characters. So let's get our last question before I read to you some chapters. Any tips for an aspiring writer? Well, wow. I would say the hardest part about being a writer nowadays might be having an original idea. Millions of books are published every year, and they're obviously crowding the entire market, and trying to stand out can be quite difficult. So I'm going to give you a tip on how to have an original idea. And it's something quite simple. I don't know if this is out there already, but it's something I've managed to think about as I've gone on my own literary journey. And I think at the core of every story, whether the author, writer, whatever, director, whether they knew it or not, there's a what if question being asked at the core of every story. If you take Harry Potter, perhaps one of the largest book franchises in history, whether it was meant to or not, there's a question of what if a boy discovered he was a wizard? That's the central question. And if you want to have an idea for a book, I suggest you ask yourself a what if question. It can be anything. It can be bizarre. It can be quite simple. And if you do that and then try to answer the question, you'll discover that you're writing your own book really, really simply. It could be anything. I'm going to just imagine something. What if the world turned inside out? It's bizarre. It's very strange. It would take something really powerful to make that happen. So what if the world turned inside out? I can't think of a book that's done that, where the entire earth just suddenly goes and the lava and the mantle and the iron core are now on the outside in a circle, and now we're all looking up and we can see across the other side of this inside this sphere, we can see China, or we can look across and there's America, because it's now all inside and reflecting in. What if the world turned inside out? But if you answer that question, you'll find a plot forming. We'll have to go, well, what turned the world inside out? And I could go, I know, an alien ship turned up. They don't like humans, and they do it to mess with us. They fire a beam at the Earth, the inside out beam. You create some science fiction mumbo jumbo to make that work. The Earth turns inside out. So now that's an answer. It's kind of a plot point. But I now have to go, well, now what happens? I go, well, where's the sun? It's all gone. We're all in darkness. That means all the artificial lights have to come on. How does the planet deal with suddenly being able to see your neighbor really easy? Well, not your neighbor, but another country across there. How do we deal with this? How do we get out? And so you see there's more questions and they need answers. And if you try answering them, you'll get your plot. So that's my tip for an aspiring writer. You want to have an idea? You want to think, I need to do something original that no one's ever thought of? Just ask yourself a bizarre what if question and then try answering it. And there's many ways to do it. Going back to the Harry Potter example, if you ask yourself, what if a boy found out he was a wizard? Then you go, well, he'd obviously want to learn magic, wouldn't he? Where does he learn magic? Well, maybe he could have a mentor, or maybe he could go to school. That one's better. So he's got to go to the school. So what's the school like? It's a castle, because it's fantasy. It needs to be castles. It can't be a high-rise office block. That'd be weird. Or maybe it could be. And what's in this castle? If it's a school, is it like our state schools and other schools and things like that? Well, and there you go. It's much easier when you just ask yourself that core what if question that you'll find in any film and any book or any play, and sometimes any poems, and just there's a what if being asked. So do that to have your own story idea. Okay, I think it's time for me to read to you 3 chapters, the first 3 chapters from The Daemon Machine. It would make sense for it to be the first 3 chapters after all. I'm not going to read you the last 3 chapters, it made no sense. But let me read the blurb, what's on the back of a book, that kind of gets you thinking, I definitely want to read this. The Daemon Machine. You're not dead yet. Grace dies. However, that's not the end of her story. Her soul has to live its life. And at first, the new world she enters seems like a wonderful place. But here be demons, seeking fresh slaves to work their minds, and Grace has fallen right into their clutches. Thankfully, she escapes, alongside a caveman, a child soldier, and one very, very angry nun. And that's just the beginning of her adventures in the soul life. The book starts with a prologue. In a fortress beneath a mountain range, in a world unknown to a majority of the human race, 6 creatures gathered. Each one of them was monstrous in appearance. Horns crowned their heads, curving and interlocking into grotesque shapes. They had no eyes, just blank foreheads, and thin lips covered their needle-like teeth. They were demons, cursed beings, standing in a semicircle facing the far wall of a candle-lit cavern. The flickering light cast their already twisted shadows into even more horrific forms. The smoke from the wicks didn't rise. Instead, it was so dense, it cascaded down the stone pillars they were set on, forming a swirling pool of yellow mist around the demons' feet. Screaming faces formed as the fumes wafted closer to the demons, rolling and twisting as if in torture. "We all know why we are here," one of the creatures said from the center of the semicircle. It had transparent skin, as if wrapped in glass, beneath which was swirling black liquid. "We have a way to change how things have been for thousands of years. If it works, the human souls will be our playthings." "The experiment was successful," another pointed out, smiling with two mouths, one of which was slightly larger than the other. "All they need are the key components and the right souls." "It is risky. We could be outnumbered if the machine fails," a demon at the far end of the semicircle said. Its arms were abnormally long enough to reach the ground. "But the rewards could be immense if it works," spoke the fourth demon, revealing not just one row of red teeth in its enlarged mouth, but several. They lined the inside of its cheeks like a shark's mouth. "We will need humans to help build it, and we will need the oldest soul there is. We will need the Pharaoh," the fifth said, who had skin so dark it could have been a hole in the surface of the world. The five demons nodded to one another. They turned to the sixth, who was by far the biggest, and who had so far not spoken nor even moved. It said nothing. It did nothing. But the other five sensed some kind of response. "Yes, sire," they said in unison. "Who would take charge?" the one who had spoken first asked. "I would relish the challenge," the double smiling demon said. There were general nods of agreement, except from the sixth demon, who remained silent and stoic. "I would like Legion to be my second," the smiler said, addressing the transparent demon directly. "If this works, I won't need such a competent soul collector back," the transparent demon replied, and nodded towards the smiling demon. "However, utilizing demons of the greater violations to handle the Pharaoh may draw attention from the city. I suggest large numbers of the lesser violations be used." There were nods from around the semicircle. "My demons will find out where the Pharaoh has hidden himself," the demon like a slit of darkness, a walking shadow, added. "Where do we start construction?" asked the long-armed demon. "I think there is only one place suitable which will provide maximum coverage," the transparent demon answered. "The garden," the twice-smiling demon said. Silence prevailed for a moment as they absorbed the decisions they had made. "What will happen to the first life?" the long-armed demon asked. "Not our concern," the smiling demon replied. Another pause as they considered the possibilities. Then the five said to one another, "Begin." The sixth remained silent. Chapter 1. Slip. "And that's what I hope to get for Christmas," Grace said to her friends, her breath frogging in the air. She conversed with them while walking backwards in order to walk and talk at the same time. "Grace, mind your step!" Jo shouted, reaching out with her hand. "What?" Grace glanced over her shoulder, saw the danger, and twisted, flinging out her arms to balance herself. She stumbled down the first few rows of steps that lined the library grounds. A light shower of snow had fallen that morning, and over the course of the day, foot traffic had crushed it down to ice. Grace gritted her teeth, scrunched up her toes, and wobbled as she tried to stay on 2 feet. She swayed for a fraction of a second, but came to a complete stop. When it seemed like she was stable, she let out a laugh and blushed as her friend sniggered at her antics. "Wow, that was—" she began, and she stood up straight. Her posture's slight adjustment sent her feet from underneath her. Her shoes had no grip with all the ice, and she fell backwards. Her head slammed into the top concrete step. Her padded fur-lined coat did not absorb the impact, and something cracked. Grace yelled in pain and rolled down the stairs, first on her side, then head over heels. It all happened so quickly she had no time to stop herself. "Grace!" her friend Matthew shouted. His cry didn't help. She felt every impact and cut and graze. There was a sudden terrible pain as her knee shattered. Finally, her head smacked a post that held up the handrail. A loud metallic sound rang, like the striking of a dull bell. When she came to a stop, she registered the bottom of the steps. She felt both the cold stone of the pavement on her cheek and warm blood running down her head. For a moment, she reflected on how well the night had been going. The snow had given her village a beautiful dusting of powder, and she was with her mates, wandering around and killing time, relaxing now that school was over and Christmas was only 4 more Advent chocolates away. Life had been going good. She had reconnected with her parents. She shouldered new responsibilities. Her 15th year was going to be great. Now her body was in so much pain, and for some reason she couldn't scream or shout. Her arms wouldn't move. She wondered how stupid she looked. If only she had been watching where she was going, she would have not been in this state now. You moron, she thought. As she lost feeling to the rest of her body, her mind shut down, and all warmth left her. The edges of her vision grew dark, and her friends' cries grew faint. Mum, Dad, she tried to say, but it was only a mumble. They were going to be so angry. She skipped out this late to see her friends, she thought. Her lungs made a final gasp for air. It all went black. Grace opened her eyes, or at least it seemed like she did. Maybe they were already open, and instead someone had just switched them on, like a light bulb. The world came into view. She stared up at a night sky filled with a full moon and bright flickering stars. She tried to remember what had happened. How had she ended up like this? It flooded back to her. The innocent accident, the brief moment of stupidity, the fall. Yes, she thought to herself, that was what had happened. She was sure she had landed on her side, not on her back. Why was she lying on her back? Grace relaxed and let her body report on the damage it must have suffered. Weirdly, she seemed fine. No pain at all. She smelled the sea for some reason. The only thing she felt was embarrassment. She must have looked like a right idiot. Grace was glad no one would have had time to film her or take pictures on their phones. She was also surprised there was no circle of friends looking down at her in concern. She sat up and her jaw dropped, and her eyes widened as they took in the scene in front of her. An ambulance was parked to her left, and its blue flashing lights were creating a strobe-like effect on the nearby library lawn. It cast dancing shadows from the revolving lights. Paramedics, police, and her friends focused on someone lying on the ground. She turned her attention to her friends. Jo literally screamed her head off and wept into Matthew's shoulder. They all comforted each other, looking down at the person the paramedics were working on. They covered their mouths with their hands, as if trying to prevent themselves from throwing up or breathing hysterically. Police moved the crowd back and tried to calm her friends. Grace got up and stumbled to the paramedics. No one stopped her as she moved through the police cordon to stand at the shoulder of one of the medics. She looked down at who was receiving the treatment. It was her. It was Grace. She looked up and saw the icy flight of stairs. The flashes of pain cut into her mind. She looked at her broken body again and properly examined herself. She felt like someone had punched her in the gut, and she turned and walked away, gasping for air. Her body was in a terrible state. Her knee looked mangled, and there was a star-shaped pattern of blood on her trousers. She remembered the pain of the knee bursting apart. Her left hand was bent at completely the wrong angle. A large cut on her head had spread blood across her forehead and into her hair. And her face, it had turned extremely pale, as if she was dead. Am I dead? Grace thought to herself. Wait, if I'm there, what am I walking around in? She looked down and let out a little gasp. She was no longer wearing her fleece, beanie, or gloves, but instead her best pair of blue jeans, a yellow shirt, and her favourite jacket and shoes. She felt her hair, which was fuller and curlier than it had ever been. But her sudden change of clothes and her excellent manicure, for some reason, was the least surprising thing about her body. More incredible was the fact that she was shining, as if she was made from light itself. Am I a ghost? She said to herself. I'm dead. I must be. She called out hysterically. I don't believe it. I'm dead. What happens now? She calmed as a sudden realization hit her. It's not that bad, she thought, admiring herself. Her body may have been exactly the same shape it was before, but for some reason, it felt more comfortable. Came a voice, followed by a sniff. She dead? Grace heard Jo blurt out between tears. The paramedics said nothing at first and just looked at the police nearby with a grim expression. Grace noticed a small shake of the head between the two emergency personnel. Your friend is severely injured. We need help getting her onto a stretcher and into the ambulance, the paramedic quickly replied. I can't be a ghost. I'm sort of still alive, I think, Grace thought. Out-of-body experience. Whoa. Hey, Joe, I'm here, she said, but she got no response from her friend. She walked up to Joe's face and shouted, Hey, Joe, I'm here. The paramedics carefully placed her body onto a stretcher, and Grace moved closer to it. She reached out to take her real hand. The world around her suddenly splintered and fractured along dark lines. What? Cried out. She pulled back her hand as the whole world continued to break like glass, radiating out from her body in the pattern of a spider's web. The ambulance, her friends, the ground on which she stood, all broke apart. Only she remained whole as everything else shattered. That's kind of pretty, she thought, then realized she no longer had anything to stand on. Grace fell, screaming as she tumbled into nothingness. She looked up and saw the pieces of the world disappearing above her, swallowed by the darkness. As she fell, her body left a trail of light in the air, as if she was a small comet flying through space. She breathed in and screamed again, twisting and flailing her arms in the air, hoping to grab onto something to stop her fall. Help! Grace shouted. No one replied. She fell what seemed like hours, with no end in sight and no ground rushing up to meet her. She was dimly aware she was plummeting beside a massive stone wall, and every so often in the darkness she spotted its jagged rocks in the glare of her own body's light. As she twisted around in midair, she saw her glow was illuminating something beneath her, something she was about to crash into. She gasped and foolishly raised her hands to protect herself from the impact. Her hands struck the ground, and a world erupted in front of her in a blazing explosion of light. Grace found herself on her feet, but on steady legs, and she staggered and then fell. She looked up, pushing her brilliant hair from her face. She was no longer falling in darkness. Instead, she was looking out over the most beautiful world she had ever seen. She corrected herself. The most beautiful world there ever could be. Grassy fields stretched as far as the eye could see, flowing with the wind like the waves of the ocean. Rivers and streams gleamed like jewels, and trees of astounding colour and shape towered over the landscape. Adding to this beauty, the entire land shone of its own accord, just like her body. A black sun hung in the sky as if in permanent eclipse, a dark star that didn't need to shine light on this luminous landscape. It was wonderful to look at, something that was brilliant to behold. Grace felt tears in her eyes. It was so dazzling. She wondered if she had gone to heaven. Yet it looked like she was in Ethiopia or South Sudan, countries her parents visited each year due to their work. She stood up and walked around, letting her hand brush through the long grass. She heard the rustle of leaves in the nearby coral trees. They were red. It was near the end of winter here. There were acacia trees in the distance, their wide canopies stretching out like umbrellas. There appeared to be no sign of civilization, just a vast, untouched world where the air was just the right temperature and smelled clean and crisp and full of wonderful scents. Am I dead? She concluded. This is the afterlife. In Africa? She thought of her parents. She was far away from them now, further than she had ever been. Her friends were gone. Her daily routine was over. Instinctively, she felt for her mobile phone. She had to call them, but of course, she had no phone. She felt like an idiot for trying. She felt pain in her chest. They were gone, and so far from her. She had left them on Earth, probably despairing over her death. She cried. Maybe there's a way to go back, she thought. Other thoughts struck her, sudden realizations that eclipsed her sadness. A great mystery had been answered, and the answer wasn't all that bad. No school, a lovely world, her body felt healthy, unbreakable. No pressure, no bad news, no climate angst, or fear for the future. That felt good. There was no longer any pressure on her to conform, to be popular, and to follow stupid rules that made no sense. She no longer had to feel embarrassed at behaving any which way she pleased. Within reason, of course, she mentally added. She broke into a run and screamed, I'm free! And flung her arms into the air. She let herself collapse into the grass. And as if she was leaving a pattern of an angel in the snow, she waved her arms and legs, gently flattening the grass around her. It was softer than her own bed. Grace closed her eyes and sighed in a state of pure bliss. No more worries. You're probably thinking, you're in heaven right now. A voice like a snake hissed above her. Far from it. In fact, you're not even technically dead yet. It laughed maniacally. Grace opened her eyes and gasped. A creature of unimaginable horror was standing over her with a creepy smile. Welcome to your soul life, human, it said as its laughter died away. It's not so bad, even if you're going to be a slave while you're here. And it reached out to her with a claw-studded hand. Chapter 2. Soul. Grace recoiled and crawled away from the creature's outstretched arm. Behind it was a mountain of black and grey stone rising high into the sky. She hadn't noticed that before. She was surprised she had missed it. One side of the mountain was jagged, as if it pierced the heavens, but the other side was flat, like someone had cut a normal mountain in two and removed one half. It was like no mountain Grace had ever seen. Her attention returned to the walking, talking horror before her. What are you? She asked. It withdrew its arm and stared at her, cocking its head to one side as it did so. It wasn't actually looking at her. It had no eyes on its face, just a mouth full of sharp teeth and two slits for nostrils. I am a demon, it said. How was your soul separated from your body? It asked. Its voice hissed through its S's. Grace didn't answer. She took in the creature's awful appearance. It was naked, but it didn't have anything to hide, so that didn't matter. Its skin was charcoal black and had the texture of a wet, discarded bin bag, rippled and clingy. Claws extended from its hands and feet, a single horn swept back from its forehead, and two more curvy ones sprouting from where its ears were. It didn't shine like the rest of the world around her, or look like it was a part of it at all. It reminded her of the world's worst Photoshop job. Grace's skin crawled just looking at it. How did your soul get separated? It asked again. The question seemed absurd to Grace. She wasn't sure what it was talking about. Disease? Murder? Was it an accident? The creature asked with absolute seriousness in its voice. The questions weren't registering with Grace. She was still shocked by the demon's appearance. Was it a car? Lots of you humans end up down here because of cars, but I still don't know what they are. I wonder sometimes why you have them at all. She realized what it was talking about. She opened her mouth to answer, paused for a moment as she considered the best response, and said, I fell down a flight of steps. She stood up, suddenly feeling the need to run away. She did. The creature roared with anger, and Grace had barely gone 3 steps when something caught her ankle. She fell, crushing the long grass beneath her. Her chin struck the ground and flared with pain. Groaning, Grace rolled over and looked at her leg. A long, thin snake had coiled its head around her ankle like a whip. The snake had extended from the demon's wrist. Don't run! You belong to the demons now, the creature said, holding the snake at its tail. Who are you? Grace asked. I am Legion, and I am one of many, so do not think you can easily escape from us. Grace didn't say anything. Legion tugged on the snake, wrapped around her leg, and then yanked hard. Grace felt like her limb was being torn off as she was dragged towards it. Ah! She screamed and held her knee as it spiked with pain. The demon grabbed her arm and lifted her to her feet. Is this hell? She asked. The demon looked straight at her, and she recoiled from its visage. Or is this heaven? She asked. The demon laughed. They always ask that. It mocked in amusement. Neither. Welcome to the soul life, the place your soul is drawn to whenever it gets separated from your body. My soul? Legion sighed. I hate explaining this to every human that comes along. It's always the same old questions. Its head flickered to one side like it had spotted something. Luckily for you, I don't have to explain. Look over there. Seeing a soul arrive is quite exotic. Grace followed its gaze. It dropped her to the ground and went to a spot a few meters away. The snake, still connected to the demon, bound around her, around both legs. What she saw was like a flower growing super fast. Light emanated out of the ground from a spot no bigger than a pinhead. The light blossomed up, forming shapes which eventually became limbs. Human souls are beautiful, the demon said, standing right next to the rising light and admiring it. What is it? Grace asked. The demon sighed again. Why do they not pay attention? I never met a human who just listens. I just said it's a soul, didn't I? Vines of light erupted from the pinpoint on the ground and then wrapped themselves around the human body that emerged. There was a dazzling flash, and when it subsided, there was a man standing in its place. He shone just like Grace. The white light from his body made the colour of his tweed clothes pale. The man blinked in surprise at what he saw around him. He had thinning white hair and glasses perched on his crooked nose. He looked like a college professor. That's how you arrived, Legion commented. Its voice drew the professor's attention. The newcomer yelped when he saw the demon and quickly stepped backwards, tripping as his feet caught one another in panic. He fell to the ground and backed away on all fours. How did your soul get separated? The demon asked the man. The man spluttered. No colour to your soul, the demon mused, looking the man up and down. You won't last long, it said bluntly. Legion turned on its heels and came back over to Grace. Come on, we might as well get going. The man managed to sputter. I died. No, you didn't, the demon said. Let me guess. Teaching. You're in teaching. What? The man said. Or maybe a vicar, a priest? What did you believe in? The demon said. I died, didn't I? The man asked, ignoring the demon's questions. No. Your soul was knocked out of your body, and when that happens, they come here. The demon looked the man over again, and then leaned forward and sniffed. Not a religious person at all. You don't smell like one. Your favourite clothes are academic, smart, early 20th century. Lecturer or philosopher, weren't you? The demon said. At that remark, the man seemed to snap to some sort of attention. I was a philosopher. Tell me, what did you believe in? Legion asked. I didn't believe in anything. I certainly never believed in an afterlife. This place, which I'm sure is not even real. Wrong choice, the demon said. Should I have been a priest? The man said with a sneer. Depends on what kind, but generally they don't survive either. Survive? The man said. Your body is in the first world right now, and your soul has come here, but it has no colour, very little energy. It's going to die here, the demon said, which is almost as beautiful to watch as it being born. Tell me how your soul got separated before that happens, please. I would like to know. I was hit by a car, the man said. Car, the demon repeated. What are these cars? I meet so many souls sent down here by those things. This is a dream, the man said. This isn't real. It's very real. Your body died, and your soul is here. Not for long, though. It's going to die, too. The man suddenly bent over and retched in pain. What's going on? Grace asked the demon. Watch, the demon said, nodding at the man. His light dimmed. He collapsed to his knees as if the wind had been kicked out of him. What's happening? Grace asked. He didn't tap into his soul while he was in his body. Now it's dying, the demon said. Your soul is strong. You drew from it well. You will have a life here. But he won't. His existence is about to cease. I've met so many atheists and religious humans. They believe in science and their holy traditions, but these things do not connect with the soul. Real faith, embracing the world, living a life where you accept that your responsibilities are easy and your burdens can be light. That makes it stronger over the course of your life. I'm glad you got to witness this. It nodded at the man, but still talked to Grace. Then I don't have to explain what happens next. The man gasped and fell onto his stomach. He began crawling over to them. With every yard, he managed to pull himself forward, and his body grew dimmer. Patches disappeared, and in the end, he could not move. His legs and arms vanished completely. Grace turned away as his torso lay there, and tears welled up in her eyes. She wanted to help, but what was happening was so awful she felt numb. The demon bent down until its mouth was next to her ear. Many things in the first life can knock your soul from its body, and your soul... It grabbed her hair and ran its fingers through it, causing her to shiver. Which is what you are now. Lives on here as long as you used it well in the first world. Welcome to your soul life. You should be honoured. Not many experience the privilege of being here. Not that you will consider it a privilege for much longer. Grace turned back to the man. He faced away, and he was crying. Someone please help me, he said, and blubbered in fear and anguish. Grace had the feeling he wasn't talking to her or the demon. What was left of the man shrank, like a slowly deflating balloon. It got smaller and smaller until what was left was a thin piece of what looked like bone. It had no defining shape. It was uneven and the size of an AA battery. Grace reached out for it, then drew back. Wasn't it like a dead body, she thought? Curiosity got the best of her, and slowly she picked it up. It was warm to the touch. Get up. There will be no more demons arriving here, the demon ordered and pulled her... Get up. There will be no more souls arriving here, the demon ordered and pulled her up off the ground by her collar. The snake uncoiled from her legs, then coiled around her hands. She continued to stare at the place where the man had been. All that was left was his imprint in the tall grass. Legion clapped an arm around her shoulder and squeezed her tight like they were the best of friends. He raised a hand to the horizon theatrically. Brighten up! You've got the rest of your soul life to look forward to. Unfortunately, you're going to be a slave while you're here. Legion pulled at the snake binding her, yanking her forward like a reluctant dog on a leash. And there we go. That's the first 3 chapters to the Daemon Machine. I hope you enjoyed them. Obviously, this book is available to get everywhere. You can find it on Amazon. There is a link in the description to take you to where you can get the Kindle version or the paperback version. You can get it. I've seen it on Waterstones, on Barnes & Noble, W.H. Smith. It's everywhere. So there's nowhere where you can't get it. And I hope, it'll be at your local library one day. Thank you so much for watching this live stream. I hope that I've answered some of your questions that you might have had about the series and set it up wonderfully so that you will go and give the rest of the book a go. Again, my thanks to Federal Press. Thanks to you for watching, of course, and have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you enjoyed this live stream. Goodbye. You now get to watch me end the live stream. Hang on a second. How do you do this anyway? Oh, there it is. It just says end live stream. Hope you enjoyed this little extra. Bye-bye.